New Year's Eve was supposed to be a celebration, but for me, it became the night everything shifted. I stood near the marble fireplace, drink in hand, watching the golden lights flicker across the walls of the Carrington estate. My wife, Cassandra, moved gracefully among the guests, effortlessly charming them as always, and our daughter Lily was somewhere outside with the other kids, waiting for the fireworks to start. It was all so perfectly staged, like a magazine spread, the kind of life people dream about. And for years, I thought I'd earned my place in it. Douglas Carrington, my father-in-law and the man who made all of this possible, caught my eye across the room and gave me a subtle nod. I followed him out, leaving the muffled laughter and clinking glasses behind. He led me into his study, a grand room I knew well, leather chairs, dark oak shelves, and that heavy silence that always followed him. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing us off from the noise outside. He didn't offer me a seat. He didn't even look at me, just walked behind his desk and started shuffling papers. I stood there, unsure whether to speak or wait, until he finally looked up and said it like he was reading off a list. "You're out, Michael." At first, I thought he was joking. 14 years I gave that company. 14 years of loyalty, sacrifice, strategy meetings that stretched past midnight, deals that pulled us from the brink of collapse, and long weekends where I missed out on Lily's childhood just to keep Carrington Steel running. And now, just like that, I was out. He kept talking, something about needing someone younger, someone hungry, a rising star from another firm with a fresh vision. Words like innovation and synergy were tossed around, but none of it mattered. My brain locked onto the only thing that mattered. I was being discarded, like old inventory. No thanks for my years of work. No mention of what I'd built. Just a 6-month severance package and a line about how this wasn't personal. Of course it wasn't personal. Not to him. To Douglas, this was business. Everything always was. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I stood there, nodding slowly, heart pounding behind my ribs like it wanted to escape. I shook his hand, a cold, perfunctory grip, then turned and left the study. As I stepped outside, the chill of winter air hit my face. Fireworks began bursting over the hills. Lily cheered somewhere in the crowd. Cassandra turned to smile at me, her eyes catching the light. And I stood there with the weight of my silence, knowing I just lost everything I thought was mine. I walked out of the study with the weight of that conversation still tightening around my chest like a vice. The music and laughter had grown louder outside. Glasses clinked, voices rose in drunken celebration, and the cold air bit at my face the moment I stepped onto the patio. For a brief second, I scanned the crowd until I saw her, Cassandra, standing near the champagne table, smiling down at her phone. She didn't look around for me. She didn't even seem curious where I'd gone. Maybe she already knew. Maybe this had been in motion longer than I realized. Or maybe it just didn't matter to her anymore. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't try to make a scene. I walked past the valet, past the laughter echoing off the Carrington Estate stone walls, and got into my car alone. The drive home was a blur, each red light giving me too much time to think, and the silence inside the cabin pressing in harder with every mile. I kept hearing Douglas's voice, calm, detached, like he was swatting away a minor inconvenience. 14 years reduced to a line item. I pulled into the driveway at 10:47 p.m., headlights cutting across the perfectly trimmed hedges in front of the house Douglas had put the down payment on. The same house Cassandra had insisted on, in the exact neighborhood her father had chosen. I remembered how she sold it to me like a dream, a fresh start, a reward for all the work I was doing. I stood in the foyer for a long moment, the sound of distant fireworks already starting to echo through the air. Upstairs, I opened a closet and stared at my side of it. The suits, the shirts pressed to perfection, all arranged like I still believed I belonged to this life. I pulled down the largest suitcase, then another. One by one, I folded my shirts, packed the ties I hadn't worn in months, the shoes I'd polished for parties where I was never more than a background fixture. I moved like someone sleepwalking through his own life. Every drawer I opened felt like lifting the lid on some quiet compromise I'd made. The family photos that never quite looked real. The watch Douglas gave me after my promotion, engraved with words that now felt cruel. The cufflinks Cassandra picked out, but never noticed when I wore. I packed it all, each item heavier than it had any right to be. I thought about Lily, about how many birthdays I'd missed because of last-minute meetings or international calls. I thought about the way she used to wait up for me as a little girl, eyes heavy with sleep, just to tell me she saved the last piece of cake. I used to tell myself it was worth it, that I was building something for her future, but now I wasn't sure if she even knew what I'd given up. Every room in that house whispered reminders of who I had to be to stay in it. I remember the first dinner with Douglas, how he told me, very plainly, that he didn't believe in handouts, that I'd have to earn every inch. And so I did. I stayed late, volunteered for the hardest accounts, swallowed every backhanded comment, every pointed reminder that I wasn't really family, just the man Cassandra had chosen. Now, standing there at the edge of midnight, with half my life folded into luggage, I realized how long I'd been trying to prove I belonged. To Douglas, to Cassandra, even to myself. The truth was, nothing in that house had ever truly been mine. Not the job, not the respect, not even the love I thought I'd earned. It had all come with conditions, and I was done paying for them. The front door slammed open just before midnight, the sharp echo of heels striking hardwood breaking the stillness I'd settled into. Cassandra stood there in her silver dress, eyes blazing, her coat hanging half off one shoulder, as if she'd stormed out in a rush. She didn't even close the door behind her. The cold air rolled in around her like smoke. "Are you out of your mind?" she snapped, tossing her clutch onto the console table. "You embarrassed me. You left without a word, in front of everyone." I stood at the foot of the stairs, hands still dusted with the folds of clothes I'd been packing. I didn't answer right away. I just watched her. The way her lip curled in that practiced mix of irritation and control. The way she barely looked at the suitcases behind me. "I was fired, Cassandra," I said finally. "Your father called me into his study like I was a contractor fixing the plumbing and told me I was done. No warning. Just a severance and a handshake." She blinked. Once. Her face didn't change. "He didn't fire you," she said, voice clipped. "He's moving the company forward. You've been stagnant, Michael. Everyone sees it. Maybe if you'd adapted more, kept up with the new strategies, this wouldn't have happened." Her words didn't land like a slap. They landed like confirmation. Cold and deliberate. Not angry. Not emotional. Just matter of fact. Like she was explaining the weather. I'd come home dazed, half expecting fury, loyalty, even confusion. But not this. Not a rational defense of the man who just destroyed everything I'd spent over a decade building. "So that's it," I said, quieter now. 14 years. Every holiday I missed, every late night I spent in that office instead of putting Lily to bed. And you're telling me I deserve this. "I'm telling you it's not personal," she said, and that hurt more than anything else. She moved past me, toward the kitchen, like this was just another minor disruption in her evening. "It's business. My father made a decision that's best for the company. You can either accept it or—" "I'm leaving," I interrupted. My voice was steady, calmer than I expected. "I packed my things. I'm leaving the house tonight." They made her pause. She turned around slowly, leaning against the kitchen counter with one arm folded beneath her chest like she was holding herself up. She studied me like I was a disappointing line in a spreadsheet. "If you walk out now," she said, "don't come back." She said it so easily. No trembling voice, no begging, no attempt to understand. Just a final warning, sharp and clean. And I realized she'd made peace with this version of events long before tonight. Maybe she'd never really expected me to last. Maybe she liked the version of me that fit neatly beside her at parties and smiled politely in her father's shadow. I looked around the house one last time. The walls we painted together. The photo of Lily in the hallway, taken on a vacation I almost didn't make because of a board meeting Douglas said was career-defining. The silence between Cassandra and me, always dressed up in routine and small talk, suddenly felt heavier than anything in my luggage. I didn't say another word. I picked up my suitcases, walked past her, and opened the door. The wind hit me like ice, and behind me, nothing followed. No footsteps, no apology, no tears, just silence. The bus station was nearly empty, the kind of place that time forgot. Flickering fluorescent lights, cracked tiles beneath my shoes, vending machines humming with artificial life. Midnight had come and gone, and the only sounds are the distant buzz of traffic and the slow shuffle of someone mopping a floor that would never truly be clean. I sat on a hard plastic bench with 2 suitcases at my feet and a growing ache in my chest that no amount of silence could soothe. My phone buzzed again, another message lighting up the screen. Cassandra's name. The earlier ones were sharp, almost cruel, accusing me of humiliating her, calling me selfish, ungrateful. Now the tone had shifted. "Come home. Let's talk. Don't do anything stupid." I didn't answer. I couldn't. The only ones I read more than once were from Lily. "Where are you, Daddy?" Followed by another a few minutes later. "Happy New Year." Simple words, but they cut deeper than anything Cassandra could say. I imagined her sitting up, confused, phone in hand, wondering why I hadn't called like I always did. She didn't know this night would change everything. I leaned forward, elbows on knees, staring at the floor and trying to ignore the slow, sinking feeling in my gut. I wasn't sure where I thought this bus would take me. Somewhere far. Somewhere without Carringtons or polished stone kitchens or silver parties filled with hollow smiles. Maybe I didn't care. I just knew I couldn't stay where I was. I didn't notice the woman approach until she spoke. Rough night. I looked up and saw her standing there, coffee cup in one hand, leather jacket zipped against the cold. She couldn't have been more than 30. Sharp eyes, like she was studying me before I'd even said a word. You could say that, I muttered, not in the mood to explain my life to a stranger. She sat down beside me without asking. Let me guess. Mid-40s, well-dressed but tired. 2 suitcases, no ticket in your hand. Staring at your phone like you're waiting for a reason not to get on the next bus out of town. Am I close? I turned my head toward her, more curious than annoyed. Is this a hobby of yours? Reading people at midnight in bus stations. Only when the story looks interesting, she said with a faint smirk. You're Michael Renshaw. That made me sit up a little. Do I know you? No, she said plainly. But I know you. Rachel Kingsley. The name meant nothing at first, but the last name, that clicked. Kingsley Strategic Solutions. The consulting firm that Carrington used to compete with before they started pretending they were too traditional for innovation. Your father's Calvin Kingsley, I said, almost without thinking. She nodded. He's been following your work at Carrington for years. Always said you were the only one over there with a brain and a backbone. I let out a dry laugh. Not sure either did me much good. That's where you're wrong, Rachel said, crossing one leg over the other. He sent me here tonight to make sure you didn't do something stupid, like vanish, or take some dead-end job because of wounded pride. I looked down at my phone again, the screen now dark. I didn't think anyone was watching. He was. We were. Carrington didn't deserve you. But you kept that company from falling apart more than once. You built systems they still don't understand, and you did it without needing to be the loudest person in the room. I didn't speak. The weight of everything I'd lost still felt too raw, too real. The house, Lily, even the illusion of love. Rachel leaned in, her tone softer now. This isn't the end, Michael. Not unless you want it to be. I stared ahead at the scratched glass window, beyond which the night stretched into nothing. For the first time in hours, I felt something other than despair. Maybe it wasn't the end. Not yet. The city looked different at 1 a.m., less like a place people lived and more like something alive on its own. Steel and glass pulsing with quiet energy. Rachel drove like she knew exactly where we were going, cutting through empty streets until we reached a towering high-rise in the heart of downtown. Kingsley Strategic Solutions was etched in brushed steel above the entrance, subtle and confident, like the building didn't need a shout to be important. Even this late, lights glowed on several floors. This wasn't a place that slept. Inside, the lobby was all polished marble and quiet efficiency. No security check, no ID badges. They knew we were coming. An elevator opened the moment we stepped through the doors, and before I could even process what was happening, I was rising through the center of it all, watching the city fall away beneath us. Rachel didn't speak. She just glanced at her phone once, then nodded to herself like everything was proceeding exactly as it should. When the elevator doors opened, the top floor was surprisingly warm. Not the cold minimalism I expected, but rich wood panels, soft lighting, and the faint scent of coffee, and something older, familiar, like leather-bound books and worn-in furniture. At the far end of the open floor, a man stood near the windows, silhouetted against the skyline. Calvin Kingsley. I'd only seen photos, read quotes in industry journals. He turned as we entered and smiled like I was someone he'd known for years. Michael, he said, stepping forward with a firm handshake. Finally. That one word struck me harder than I expected. Not nice to meet you. Not I've heard about your work. Just finally, like this moment was overdue. His grip was strong, but it was the way he looked at me, directly, with familiarity and respect, that caught me off guard. There was no performance in it. No games. I've been waiting for Carrington to let you go, he said casually, motioning toward a long conference table where a small stack of papers sat waiting. Frankly, I thought you jumped ship years ago, but you're loyal. I respect that, even when it's to the wrong people. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. He gestured for me to sit, and Rachel disappeared without a word, like her part was done. Calvin sat across from me, never breaking eye contact. You held that company together longer than they deserved. The Hawthorne Project? You made it profitable within 7 months. I read your internal report. You mentioned every shift supervisor by name. That doesn't happen anymore. The Kessler plant. Your restructuring model was the only reason they didn't shut it down during the pandemic. I still don't know how you got that crew back on their feet with half the budget and no downtime. I blinked, stunned. Those weren't exactly public wins. They didn't need to be. Real leadership doesn't come with headlines. He reached into the folder and pulled out a single-page offer letter. Printed. No drama. No slides or long presentations. Just numbers and terms that spoke louder than any pitch. I want you to run national operations. Full autonomy. You pick your team. You set the standards. High 6-figure salary, substantial equity, and the one thing Carrington never gave you: freedom. Build something that matters, not something that flatters a boardroom. I stared at the page, then at him. My heart was pounding. This wasn't a second chance. It wasn't a lifeline. It was the thing I'd worked toward all those years and never quite touched. I looked him in the eye, my voice low but steady. I'm in. He smiled again, and this time it wasn't polite. It was proud. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Not for the title I held or the events I attended, but for the work, for the quiet battles, for who I really was. I waited until morning. Not because I needed time to think. I had done enough of that in silence, in doorways, in the corners of rooms where I was barely visible, but because I wanted the call to land in daylight, where things couldn't be mistaken for a dream. The moment the clock passed 9 a.m., I dialed Cassandra. She answered on the second ring, sharp and already defensive, like she'd been bracing for a confrontation since the night before. Michael, she snapped, if this is about last night, you need to calm down. You left like a child, and frankly, it's concerning. I think you need to talk to someone. I'm talking to someone, I said quietly. I'm talking to you, and I'm telling you this is over. I'm filing for divorce. Silence. A beat. Then laughter. Short, clipped, incredulous. You're serious? You're really going to burn everything down because you're having some kind of emotional collapse? This isn't you. You're just... No. I cut in, my voice steady. This is me. This is me finally waking up. She started to respond, but I ended the call. There was nothing else to say. The person she married had been molded to fit her world. Polite, composed, useful. I wasn't useful anymore, and suddenly that made me disposable. But I had value, not because of my title or my place in the Carrington machine, but because I was still a father, still a man with something real to give. I drove to Douglas's estate mid-morning, the same path I had taken so many times before, only this time I wasn't arriving to perform. No forced smiles. No pretending. I was there for one reason. Lily was already waiting when I pulled up, sitting on the front steps with her small suitcase beside her, knees pulled up to her chest. She looked smaller than usual, guarded. As I got out of the car, she stood up slowly. Is this because of Grandpa? She asked, voice small but steady. I crouched in front of her, so we were eye level. Her eyes looked like Cassandra's, but softer, curious instead of calculating. No, I said. This is because people forget how to treat each other. And when someone tells you that treating you badly isn't personal, they're lying. She didn't ask more. She just nodded once and took my hand. We didn't go back to the old house. I didn't want her memory of that place tied to what came next. Instead, we found a small pizza shop tucked into a quiet corner of the city. A red vinyl booth, the kind with cracked seams and a view of the street. We split a pepperoni and a root beer float. I let her talk first, about school, her friends, the dog Douglas wouldn't let her play with because it shed too much. Then I told her everything. Not the business terms. Not the betrayal in full detail. Just the truth. That sometimes grown-ups get so used to being silent, they forget how to ask for what they need. That I had spent too long trying to keep peace instead of making a real life. That I wasn't going to do that anymore. I want something better for us, I said. Not bigger. Not richer. Just better. Real. And I want time with you. Time we both remember. Not just holidays. She listened without fidgeting, eyes locked on mine like she was memorizing the words. When the pizza was down to one slice, she leaned over the table and said softly, "You're my hero." I smiled, and for the first time in a long, long while I believed it. Cleveland in February was cold in a way that got into your bones. The kind of cold that found the cracks in your resolve and tested them every morning. But it didn't matter. Rachel and I didn't come for comfort. We came for the dying factory on the edge of town, the one bleeding $180,000 a month and held together by rust, resentment, and a skeleton crew that had stopped believing in anything above their pay grade a long time ago. The numbers were brutal. Broken equipment, outdated logistics, morale at rock bottom. Previous consultants had flown in, sat in boardrooms, scribbled jargon across whiteboards, then disappeared. I didn't waste time with that. The day we arrived, I left the meeting jacket in my hotel room and walked straight onto the floor. The smell of hot steel and coolant hit me as the doors opened. Half the workers didn't even look up. The other half gave me the usual corporate glance, cautious, waiting to be told what they already knew, that they were the problem. But I didn't come to blame anyone. I came to listen. For the first 2 weeks, I barely touched a spreadsheet. I walked the line with welders, talked to machine operators on their breaks, sat with logistics clerks over stale coffee in the back office. I learned their names. I learned how many had been asked to do 3 jobs for 1 paycheck. I learned which machines were held together with wire and prayer. I learned that none of the people who'd analyzed this place had ever worn steel-toed boots. Rachel was everywhere too, clipboard in hand, asking questions that dug deeper than mine. She had a way of making people feel heard without ever losing control. Together, we mapped out everything. Not just what was broken, but why. And who'd been quietly patching things up without thanks, just to keep the place from collapsing. By week 4, changes started happening. Not overnight. Not with fireworks. Just one small fix at a time. A new part supplier. A maintenance schedule written by the guys, actually using the machines. A shift rotation that gave people time to breathe. I didn't make speeches. I didn't hold meetings unless we had something to say. And slowly, you could feel it. The temperature in the building changing, like someone had opened a window and let in air that didn't reek of hopelessness. By the end of 90 days, we weren't just breaking even. We were turning a profit. The numbers didn't lie. The crew didn't lie either. They stood taller, worked cleaner, and started saying we again. My name started showing up in trade articles. Interviews. Quiet invitations from people who once never returned my calls. And then, one night, 6 months later, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but the voice was familiar. Anxious, clipped, tried to hold itself together. Michael, this is Ethan Vance. The kid they replaced me with. Douglas's golden boy. MBA, fresh out of a business case study. I hadn't thought about him much. I figured he was doing exactly what he was trained to do. Look impressive in meetings and ignore the people who actually kept the lights on. He didn't waste time. I need help. Carrington's bleeding. I don't know what's wrong. The board's on me. My reports are a mess. I've cut costs, automated everything I could, but it's only getting worse. I thought I was doing everything right. I let the silence stretch just long enough to feel real. Talk to the people doing the actual work, I said. He paused. What? You're looking in the wrong direction. Stop staring at dashboards and start listening to the floor. They'll tell you what's wrong, but you have to actually care. Another pause. That's it. That's everything. And I hung up. There was no satisfaction in it. No sense of revenge. No victory. Just a deep, steady ache. Not for him, but for the machine he'd been fed into. For the future he'd inherited, built on hollow leadership and polished neglect. I knew that place. I'd lived it. And now he was learning the truth the hard way. The same truth that almost swallowed me whole. A year can pass like a gust of wind when you're finally walking in the right direction. As COO of Kingsley Strategic, every day had purpose, not pressure. I wasn't micromanaged, second-guessed, or used for optics. I made decisions that mattered and saw the impact in real time. Not in shareholder reports, but in the faces of people who now believe their work meant something. Under Calvin's leadership, we weren't just growing. We were redefining what leadership looked like. And I was finally a man my daughter could point to and say, that's my father. So when the offer came, it didn't feel like revenge. It felt like gravity. Carrington Steelworks was imploding. Mismanagement, ego, and a new generation of leadership that didn't know steel from spreadsheets. Ethan had stepped down. Investors pulled out. Contracts were bleeding to competitors. What once stood as a monument to old-school dominance had become a cautionary tale on every boardroom circuit. When the brokers approached Calvin with a distress sale, he turned to me with a single question. You want it? I didn't hesitate. Within weeks, the deal was closed. Carrington Steelworks, the company I'd once given everything to, now sat under Kingsley ownership. At a tenth of its former valuation. A tenth of what it cost me to survive it. Walking into the building that first morning, everything felt smaller. The halls weren't intimidating. The silence wasn't loaded. The weight that used to crush my chest every time I passed Douglas's office wasn't there. I owned every square inch now. Not out of spite, but because I'd earned it. Douglas was already inside, packing the last of his things. The nameplate had been removed. The portraits had come down. He looked thinner, older, stripped of the power that once defined him. When he turned and saw me, he didn't flinch, but his eyes, once sharp with authority, were tired. I suppose congratulations are in order, he said, voice low. I said nothing. He stood there awkwardly, holding a box of plaques and framed awards no one would ever care about again. I know I handled things poorly, he added. With you. With a lot of people. I thought I was doing what needed to be done. I looked him in the eye. This isn't about revenge. His brow furrowed slightly, caught off guard. It's about saving the people you failed, I continued. The ones you never listened to. The ones who held this place together while you stood in front of mirrors, pretending to lead. He didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. After he left, I sat down at the desk that once denied me a seat. I didn't feel triumph. I felt responsibility. I called in the department heads. I reviewed every layoff, every burned bridge. I made calls myself to the floor managers, the clerks, the welders who'd been discarded like parts. Some didn't answer. Some did, surprised, cautious, emotional. I asked them to come back. Not because the company needed them, but because the new company deserved them. In the months that followed, we rebuilt from the inside out. No more top-down mandates. No more ceremonial leadership. We paid fairly. We promoted on merit. We listened. The culture shifted like steel under fire. Hard at first, but willing to bend for something better. I didn't frame degrees on the wall. I framed blueprints from the shop floor. I kept a photo of Lily on my desk. Not posed, but candid, laughing over pizza, the night she called me her hero. And as I walked those halls now, people looked me in the eye. Because in the end, the best revenge wasn't revenge at all. It was becoming the man they said I could never be.